Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we are going to discuss reforms under President Johnson after Kennedy's assassination. So he becomes president after Kennedy's assassination, and he shares the same goals as Kennedy, and those goals come to form the Great Society domestic program. Johnson successfully pushes a lot of these programs through when Kennedy couldn't because Johnson is more experienced. And all of this domestic legislation would become the first step in achieving the quality of life that Johnson thought that all Americans should enjoy. So a little bit about Johnson. He serves from Kennedy's death in 1963 until early 1969 when Nixon will take over. He does not run again in 1968, although he could have. But because he is so unpopular from the Vietnam War. He's a Democrat from Texas, and Kennedy chose him because he was a Protestant from the Southwest, and Kennedy was a Catholic from the Northeast. So he, quote-unquote, balanced the ticket and is important to Kennedy's victory. He's known for his great drive and ambition, his political experience, the Great Society Initiative, and escalating our involvement in Vietnam up to 550,000 troops. So Johnson, when he addresses a joint session of Congress right after Kennedy's death, and he says that the best way to honor Kennedy would be to pass this civil rights bill, and they finally do get it passed in summer of 1964, the next year. And he also declares a war on poverty because of Michael Harrington's book, The Other America. This is a $1 billion bill to fight poverty, and what it does is it provides job training programs, health care to those who are underprivileged, and education to the uneducated. In the 1964 Economic Opportunity Act creates the Job Corps to train people that are 16 to 21 to learn new skills for the jobs they will have. Also, prior to 1964, he creates the VISTA program and the Head Start program. VISTA is kind of like the Peace Corps. We'll talk about the Peace Corps with Kennedy in a little bit, but the Peace Corps took volunteers from America and sent them to developing countries. VISTA basically sends volunteers to poorer communities in America to help them. And the Head Start program provides federal funds for underprivileged children to get ready for elementary school, because if middle class and upper class children are learning stuff when they are little and lower class children are not, then they're going to be behind when they get to elementary school, and Head Start is meant to close that gap. So Johnson's Great Society program begins after his 1964 re-election over Republican Barry Goldwater, and it's his domestic program to reduce poverty and racial injustice. And it hits a variety of different aspects of American society. First of all, health care. It creates the Medicare and Medicaid program, which Medicare is for old people and Medicaid is for the poor and disabled. So Medicare is for those who are over 65 and Medicaid are for those who are poor and disabled. You'll need to keep those straight. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act is a landmark piece of education legislation that provides federal funds to schools who are in poorer communities. And if you're in a poorer community, your school can apply for these federal funds to improve libraries, provide language laboratories for people who don't speak English, and help out provide services for impoverished school districts. In the environment, in the late 60s is when people start paying attention to what we as humans are doing to the environment and how our actions are going to have long-term consequences. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, which you can buy at the bookstore still, it's a classic, details how chemical fertilizers used and pesticides are damaging our ecosystem. And so Congress passes the Clean Air Act, which establishes emission standards for new cars and industrial factories, and the Air Quality Act sets air pollution guidelines. Consumer advocacy, a man by the name of Ralph Nader, who later becomes a politician, his book Unsafe at Any Speed basically criticizes the auto industry for the lack of concern over passenger safety. Seatbelts aren't standard. Hoods in car hoods are coming back and decapitating people in the car. So basically, Congress remedies this by passing the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act, which establishes safety standards for automotive vehicles and creates rules for the road. Immigration, we still have the quota system from the 1920s that makes us more isolationist, and it is racist because it allows more people from white Western European countries to come here, let alone other parts of the world. So the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 alters America's quota system. And what is the legacy of the Great Society? Well, Johnson expands the federal government more than any president since FDR and the New Deal. The war on poverty helps, but it does create programs that suck up our national budget and creates the federal deficit, the budget deficit and the national debt that we have today. Basically, what is happening in the Great Society is going to be quickly overshadowed by what's going on in Vietnam. This inspires minorities to expand their economic opportunities, and whether you are a critic or a proponent of the Great Society, the percentage of Americans living under the poverty line shrinks by over half to 22.2 to 12.6 in 1970. Not over half, about half. And if you look at this graphic, this is a projection from a few years ago, but by 2020, out of all the money that the United States brings in, 4 items could suck up 92% of our tax dollars. And Social Security is one. Medicare and Medicaid are 36% of the federal budget. And the interest paid on our debt is 28%. And that leaves 8% of our federal budget for everything else. So this is a huge portion of our national budget. The Warren Court is named after Chief Justice Earl Warren. He gave the decision in Brown versus Board of Education, and several major decisions are made during the Warren Court. It's the most liberal court in U.S. history. It affects the lives of everyday Americans. So let's go over these cases. Every 10 years, we have a reapportionment, which means we redraw election districts. And until 1962, they could just do it however they wanted to. But if basically we have more people in cities than out in the rural areas, that means people in the cities have less power per vote. To put it in an example, if one person lives in City A and 100,000 people live in City B, City A's one citizen has more power per vote than the 100,000 people do, because they both share a representative, or one representative each. So I've always heard it pronounced Baker versus Carr, and Reynolds versus Sims establishes the principle of one person, one vote. And they need to redraw election districts so that each district has an approximately equal amount of people per district. And that happens every 10 years. It's a very contentious process done in our state legislatures. As far as freedom of speech, something that might be interest to you, Tinker versus Des Moines in 1969 has to do with the Vietnam War. People in a high school wanted to wear black armbands to show their non-support of the Vietnam War, and they were suspended. But symbolic speech that does not cause any harm in school is protected under the First Amendment. And this case also says that students do not give up all of their rights to free speech when they enter a school. Now, there have been 3 or 4 big cases since then that do put limits on school speech, but it's not an all-encompassing limit. And critics say that this case goes too far, that we are interpreting the Constitution too loosely, and that is called judicial interpretation, when we interpret the Constitution beyond what the original founders would have wanted. And free speech is free speech. This expands free speech to more than just the spoken word. It's also symbolic speech, or wearing a black armband, so to speak. And rights of the accused, 4 major cases that protect accused criminals. Mapp versus Ohio, if evidence is seized illegally, like without a warrant, it cannot be used in the courts. So that ends any it ends any reason for police to obtain evidence illegally. In Gideon versus Wainwright, this allows requires that courts provide free counsel or lawyers to those who cannot afford it. And Escobedo versus Illinois said that people have a right to an attorney during police questioning. And Miranda versus Arizona is where the Miranda rights come from, and that is what you are read or what you have to sign when you are being arrested. So people must be informed of their rights at the time of their arrest, and they cannot be interrogated and if they invoke their rights. So the last case I forgot to put on here, sorry, Engel versus Vital, basically says that schools cannot require any sort of prayer or it basically affirms separation of church and state, and there can be no religious affiliation with public schools. So that's all I have for you. Those of you who will listen to me know that I mentioned Engel versus Vital, and we'll talk more about it in class, but fill out your learning targets, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.